The wind howled like a wounded wolf through the Wyoming mountains, driving sheets of snow sideways across the narrow trail. Sarah Whitfield clutched the reins with numb fingers. Her wedding dress, once pure white, now soaked through and clinging to her shaking frame. Behind her came the sound she feared most, the muffled thunder of hooves through snow. They were gaining. There! "The witch went that way!" The shout cut through the storm, rough and cruel as the wind itself. Sarah dug her heels into the mare's flanks, urging the exhausted animal forward. The horse stumbled, nearly throwing her down the rocky slope. She had been riding for 3 hours. Ever since she fled the church, where her father had sold her like property to pay his debts. Marcus Thornton. Even thinking his name made bile rise in her throat. He was the land baron who owned half the county, a man who crushed others for sport. When her father lost everything at the poker table, Thornton had come to collect. One look at Sarah, and he'd declared she was worth more than any acre of land. Now his men were hunting her through the storm. Sarah's heart hammered as she guided the mare around a massive boulder. The trail forked ahead. One path led higher into the mountains, the other curved back toward the valley. She didn't hesitate. Better to die in the wilderness than live as Thornton's wife. The storm grew fiercer, the wind biting like knives. She could barely see more than a few feet ahead. Her hands and feet had long since gone numb. The mare's breath came in heavy clouds of steam, each step slower than the last. Then, suddenly, the ground vanished beneath them. The horse screamed as they plunged down an embankment, tumbling through snow and brush. Sarah flew from the saddle, the world spinning in chaos. She hit something hard, maybe a tree, and stars burst behind her eyes. When everything stopped moving, she lay half buried in snow. Pain flared sharp and deep in her ankle, twisted at an unnatural angle. The mare was gone, swallowed by the storm. Sarah tried to stand, but collapsed instantly. A sob tore from her throat. This was it. She would die here in her wedding dress, frozen and forgotten. "She went this way! Fresh tracks!" The voices were closer now. Panic gave her strength. Sarah crawled through the snow, dragging herself behind a fallen log. She pressed her body down, praying the storm would hide her. Through the swirling white, she saw them, 2 riders picking their way down the trail above. Jake Morrison and Tom Briggs, Thornton's most ruthless enforcers. Men who'd burned homes for less. They were almost directly above her now. "The trail goes cold here," Morrison growled. "That fall probably killed her," Briggs said. "But Thornton wants her back." "Dead or alive?" "Alive," Briggs sneered. "For the wedding night." Their laughter made Sarah's stomach twist. She pressed her face into the snow, willing herself invisible. Then, crack! A rifle shot echoed through the storm. Morrison's hat flew off, a neat hole punched through the crown. "The next one won't miss," a deep voice called out from above. "Turn around, ride back the way you came." "Who's there?" Briggs shouted, scanning the ridge. Another shot hit the ground inches from his horse's hooves, sending the animal rearing in panic. "Last warning?" Sarah had never heard a voice like that, calm as still water, but sharp with command. Whoever this stranger was, Morrison and Briggs believed him. They exchanged looks, then turned their horses back the way they came. Within minutes, the blizzard swallowed them. Sarah stayed still, her breath shallow. Had she just traded one danger for another? Footsteps crunched through the snow. A figure appeared from the white. A tall man, broad-shouldered, moving with the easy grace of someone born to these mountains. He wore buckskin and fur, a rifle slung casually in one hand. When he turned his head, she caught a glimpse of his face, strong, wind-burned, framed by long, dark hair. His eyes found her instantly, as if he'd known where to look all along. Storm gray, steady, unflinching. "You hurt?" His voice softened, still carrying quiet authority. Sarah tried to speak, but her teeth chattered too hard. The man, clearly native by his features and dress, approached slowly, like one might approach a wounded animal. My ankle, she managed. Twisted, maybe broken. He knelt beside her, movements careful. Name's Chaitton Ironhand. Been watching those two track you for an hour. His hands were surprisingly gentle as he examined her ankle through the soaked fabric. Not broken, but bad sprain. You can't walk on it. I can't stay here, she gasped. They'll come back. They won't find you, he said simply. My place isn't far. Can you ride? My horse, gone. Mine's sure-footed, used to carrying double. As if summoned, a paint horse emerged from the trees, snorting steam. Chaitton lifted her as if she weighed nothing. Despite his strength, his touch stayed careful, respectful. Hold tight, he said, climbing into the saddle behind her. Storm's getting worse. Sarah had no choice but to lean back against him as they rode. His body radiated warmth, steady and solid. The horse picked its way through the invisible trail, guided by the warrior's sure hand. After a long silence, Sarah shouted over the wind, "Why, help me!" Chaitton didn't answer for a while. When he did, his voice was quiet but firm. A man who forces a woman to marry him ain't a man at all, just another kind of wolf that needs putting down. There was a story in that voice, a wound as deep as her own, but the cold was stealing her strength. The world dimmed. She drifted in and out of consciousness, trees giving way to a clearing, smoke rising from a chimney. Then, warmth, fire. A prayer murmured in a language she didn't understand. And at last, darkness. When Sarah opened her eyes again, she was under a buffalo hide, surrounded by the scent of wood smoke and coffee. The cabin walls were thick logs, the air heavy with warmth. For a moment, she couldn't remember where she was. Then the memories came rushing back. The chase, the storm, the man who'd saved her. "Easy," came the voice from the shadows. Chaitton Ironhand stepped into the firelight, a steaming mug in his hand. His expression was unreadable, but his tone carried quiet kindness. "That ankle needs time," he said, offering her the mug. Sarah took it with shaking hands. The coffee was bitter, but it thawed the last of the cold from her bones. "How long have I been asleep?" "Most of the day. Sun's setting now." He turned to stir a pot over the fire. "Needed to get that dress off you before you froze solid. My sister's clothes are in the trunk there. They're old but dry." Sarah looked down, startled, to see she was wearing a soft doeskin dress. Heat rushed to her cheeks. Chaitton didn't look her way. "My sister's been gone 10 years, he said quietly. "Fever took her, took my wife and daughter, too." Sarah's heart ached. She saw now the woman's touch frozen in time. Pots by the hearth, a child's doll in the corner. A life once full, now silent. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Chaitton shrugged. Long time passed. He ladled stew into bowls. "You hungry?" Her stomach growled in answer. As they ate by the fire, the storm eased outside. Sarah found herself studying the man across from her. The quiet strength, the weariness behind his calm eyes. A man who'd known loss, yet still chose kindness. And for the first time since the nightmare began, Sarah Whitfield felt safe. When Sarah woke the next morning, sunlight streamed through the cabin window. The storm had passed, leaving a world buried in white. For a long moment, she simply watched the fire crackle and felt the quiet peace of the place. It was strange, after so much fear, to feel safe again. Chaitton was already up, moving quietly about the cabin. He poured her a cup of coffee and set it beside her without a word. She noticed again how everything he did was careful, efficient, and silent. Years of living alone had turned his movements into something close to ritual. "Your ankle's looking better," he said, kneeling to check the bandage. "Few more days and you'll be walking again." Sarah nodded, embarrassed at how aware she was of his nearness. "I can't thank you enough if you hadn't come when you did." "You'd have managed," he said simply. "You've got fight in you. I saw that." She smiled faintly. "Maybe. But I'm not sure I could have fought much longer." Quote. He looked at her then, really looked. "You ran from something worth fighting," he said softly. "That takes more courage than staying put." Sarah didn't know what to say. Instead, she looked around the cabin again. her eyes falling on a small shelf filled with books. An unexpected sight in a mountain home. "You read?" "Missionaries taught me when I was a boy," he said, tending the fire. "Before I learned what they were really after." She caught the bitterness in his tone. "Your people?" He nodded. "They wanted our land, our souls, but books aren't to blame for that. Words can heal as much as they harm." Sarah was quiet a while, listening to the sound of the wind outside. "You've been alone a long time." 10 years, he said, "since the fever. Took half my band, and the half that lived scattered. I stayed. Didn't see much reason to leave." Her heart ached at the loneliness in his voice. "And you've really seen no one since?" "No one that mattered." Sarah didn't know why those words hit her so hard. She turned her gaze to the fire, trying to steady her breath. Days passed in quiet rhythm. Sarah's ankle healed under Chaitton's careful attention. She helped where she could, mending clothes, tidying, cooking small meals to repay his kindness. The silence between them grew less heavy. It became comfortable. One evening, as snow fell gently outside, she sat by the fire, reading from one of his old books, The Tempest. Her voice filled the small cabin, soft and clear. Chaitton listened from across the room, his hands idle for once. When she finished, he said quietly, "My wife used to read that one. Said it reminded her that even storms end." Sarah smiled sadly. "She sounds like she was kind." She was more than kind. She was light. He stared into the flames. "When she and our little one died, the light went with them." The pain in his voice was raw and real. Sarah crossed the room and knelt beside him. "You've kept their memory alive," she said softly. "That matters." He shook his head. "No, I just kept breathing." "Then maybe it's time you start living again." He looked at her then, storm-gray eyes searching hers. "You think that's possible?" She met his gaze without flinching. "I think you just saved a woman's life because you couldn't stand to see another soul lost to cruelty. That sounds like life to me." The air between them changed, heavy, electric. Chaitton looked away first, standing abruptly. "I'll bring in more wood." That night Sarah couldn't sleep. She lay awake under the buffalo hides, listening to the wind. The cabin, the man, the strange safety she felt. All of it scared her in a way she couldn't explain. Not the fear of danger, but of wanting something again after believing she'd lost everything. The next morning she woke to find Chaitton already outside, splitting wood. The sight of him, strong, steady, alive, stirred something deep in her chest. By the third day, the world beyond the cabin began to thaw. Streams ran again, and the sun glittered on the snow like glass. Sarah's ankle had healed enough for her to move about. Together they rode down to check his traps, and for the first time since fleeing her old life, she laughed. That laugh stopped Chaitton in his tracks. He turned to look at her, something breaking open in his expression. "You should laugh more," he said quietly. "It suits you." Sarah felt her cheeks warm. "It's been a long time since I had reason to. Maybe it's time you found one." That night, as they sat before the fire, she read again. This time he asked her to. When her voice faltered on the words, he took the book from her hands and set it aside. "I haven't seen a woman in 10 years, he said suddenly, his voice rough, as if the words had been torn from him. "Haven't wanted to." Sarah's breath caught. "Until now?" He nodded once, eyes dark with emotion. "Until now." The fire crackled between them. Sarah felt her heart racing, not from fear, but from something new, something fierce and alive. "Then don't wait another 10 years, she whispered. Chaitton reached out, his hands trembling just slightly as they found her face. He kissed her, soft and reverent, as though remembering how. The world outside disappeared. The snow, the past, the ghosts. When they parted, he rested his forehead against hers. "This is madness," he murmured. "Or maybe it's the only sane thing left," Sarah whispered. Outside, the wind howled again, but inside the cabin, spring had finally come to the mountains. "Wait, before we move on, what do you think about the story so far?" The morning after that first kiss, sunlight broke through the cabin window like a blessing. Sarah woke to the sound of crackling firewood, and the rich scent of brewing coffee. For a moment, she simply watched Chaitton move across the small space, his shoulders broad beneath his buckskin shirt, his movements calm and sure. He turned when he sensed her gaze and smiled softly. "Morning, wife," he said, and the word made her heart leap. She smiled back, shy but happy. "Morning." They ate together in companionable silence, but both knew the peace couldn't last. Thornton wouldn't stop searching for her. Sooner or later he'd come again. "He'll send more men," Chaitton said, as if reading her thoughts. "Maybe come himself." Sarah's stomach tightened. "Then we should keep hiding. Stay here where he can't find us." Quote. Chaitton shook his head. "I've spent 10 years hiding, Sarah. I won't do it anymore, and neither will you. We face him." "Face him?" she repeated, her voice shaking. "He owns everything. The sheriff, the judge, half the territory." "Then we take away what he really owns," Chaitton said. "Fear." That afternoon they packed provisions, dressed warmly, and saddled the paint horse. They would ride down to Greer's Crossing, the nearest town, and have their mountain marriage made legal in the white man's way. It was the only way to strip Thornton of any claim over her name. The journey took 2 days. The first night they camped under the stars, and Sarah found herself staring at him across the firelight, thinking how strange life was, how she had fled in terror and found peace in the arms of a man she'd never known existed. Chaitton caught her watching and smiled. "What?" "Just wondering if you ever imagined this," she said softly. He looked at the stars. Not for a long time. By the second morning, the outline of Greer's Crossing appeared through the valley fog. Small, dusty, but alive. People paused to stare as they rode in. A Lakota warrior and a white woman dressed in doeskin. Whispers followed them. But Chaitton rode tall, his hand steady on the reins. They stopped at the church, where a thin, kind-eyed preacher named Michael Stewart answered their knock. "We need to be married," Chaitton said simply. "Legal, binding." Stewart blinked in surprise. "You, together?" Sarah stepped forward. "Before God and man," she said. "If you believe in both." The preacher studied them a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Come inside." The ceremony was simple. No flowers, no crowd, just sacred words in a quiet church. But when Stewart said, "I now pronounce you man and wife," something deep inside Sarah shifted. She was no longer running. She was no longer owned. As they signed the certificate, the church door burst open. Jake Morrison stood there, gun at his hip, eyes cold. "Well, well," he sneered. "The runaway bride and her savage husband. Thornton's going to pay plenty to get you both back." Quote. Chaitton moved between Sarah and Morrison, calm but deadly. "She's my wife, legal and proper. You've got no claim." "The law's whatever Mr. Thornton says it is," Morrison replied. "Not in God's house," Reverend Stewart said firmly, stepping forward. "This marriage is recognized here, and in the eyes of heaven." Morrison's smile faltered as townspeople began gathering outside, drawn by the shouting. "You think these folks will protect you? Thornton's coming, with men, with papers. You'll all hang for this." "Then let him come," Chaitton said. "We'll be waiting." When Morrison left, the preacher turned to them, pale but resolute. "He'll bring trouble, but sometimes trouble's the only way to wash away evil. You've given this town something it hasn't had in a long time, hope." That night, Sarah and Chaitton stayed in the boarding house, their hands intertwined. "They'll come at dawn," he said quietly. "Then we'll face them together." At sunrise, dust clouds appeared on the horizon. Marcus Thornton rode in with a dozen men, his white horse gleaming, his expression full of rage. He stopped in the center of town, shouting, "Sarah! Time to come home." Sarah stepped forward, Chaitton beside her. "Home?" she said coldly. "You mean your prison. I'd rather die free than live as your possession." The crowd stirred, Thornton sneered. "You think these people will protect you?" "They already are," Sarah said. One by one, townspeople appeared. Reverend Stewart, the blacksmith, the storekeeper, even the schoolteacher, each armed, each standing firm. "You own nothing here," the blacksmith called. "Not fear, not people." Chaitton's voice rang out, calm and steady. "Leave now, Thornton. Or learn what it means to lose everything." Thornton's hand twitched toward his gun, but he stopped. All around him, rifles were aimed steady and sure. His men looked uneasy. Morrison muttered something about bad odds. "You can't kill me all," Thornton shouted. "Maybe not," someone answered, "but we can bury you together." For a long moment, no one moved. Then Thornton spat in the dust and turned his horse. "This isn't over." "Yes," Chaitton said quietly, "it is." As the riders disappeared down the trail, the tension broke. People cheered, some cried, and Reverend Stewart dropped to his knees in prayer. Sarah turned to Chaitton, tears on her cheeks. "We did it," she whispered. He smiled, pulling her close. "No, you did it. You gave them courage." Weeks later, word spread that Marcus Thornton had lost everything: his land, his power, his name. Some said he fled west. Others said he died alone. Sarah didn't care which was true. She only cared about the man who stood beside her, the man who had given her freedom without asking for anything in return. Seasons changed. They returned to the mountain, built a new life, and with spring came new hope. A garden, laughter, and soon the stir of new life within Sarah's belly. Chaitton kissed her forehead one morning as they watched the sun rise. "No regrets?" he asked softly. "Only that we didn't find each other sooner," she said, smiling through happy tears. Under the vast Wyoming sky, the Lakota warrior and the runaway bride held each other close. They had faced storms, cruelty, and fear, and won. Their story wasn't about escape anymore. It was about choosing life, choosing love, choosing each other every single day.